Hi there, I'm William Opioke. I'm the catering chef here at Augusta Health. I'm going to be walking you through a really simple and delicious garbanzo bean soup. It's a really great combination of vegetables. We got cabbage, onions, potatoes, bell pepper, and garbanzo beans. Really nice, flavorful broth. Very, very simple and easy to make. For starters, I'm going to turn my pan here, my soup pot on. I have a little bit of oil in here. I'm gonna turn on a medium heat. I'm gonna use my onion. This is a rather large yellow onion, so I'm only gonna use half of this. You're gonna need about one medium-sized onion. I'm gonna cut the top off right there, give myself a nice flat surface to cut with. I'm gonna reserve these little bits and skins if I'm ever making a stock. I'm gonna remove that paper right there. Put that over there. I'm gonna peel one layer away. And again, we're gonna save that. This has a lot of good flavor in it for us to make our own vegetable broth. So I'm gonna start. Have a nice flat surface to cut with. I'm just gonna go down. I'm not cutting all the way to the root to keep all those layers intact. Just like that. And then all of these pieces are together, but I can come by and do this, and we have a nice dice. Now this is ready to go into our pot. The great thing about this soup is that you can just keep adding to the pot as you go. Start with your onions. Then next we're gonna add our peppers. And we want to get this up to cook a little bit and to sear. We're not really looking to caramelize them just until they start to get translucent. Next, we're gonna have one bell pepper. I'm using a red bell pepper. You can use yellow or green or orange, whatever kind you like. The colors are they have nothing to do with the flavor. I'm gonna take my pepper, cut it in half. Just scoop out the seeds here. Oop. Pull out that white membrane. It's edible, but a lot of people don't like the bitterness that it imparts to dishes. Just give it a few taps to get rid of any excess seeds. Now I'm going to take this and cut this into strips. Right there. Line up those strips and then cut them the opposite way to get a nice dice. All right, now we're gonna add that to our pot. I'm gonna turn up the heat here so we can get those vegetables seared really nicely. Our onions and our peppers are starting to cook. To this, we're going to add our garlic next. I'm leaving this as a clove of garlic. They vary in size. You can use as large or as little cloves as you like, whatever you prefer flavor-wise. We're going to use about 2 tablespoons of garlic. I would wager a bet that probably about these 3 cloves will be pretty good size for us. We're going to just, starting at the top of the clove down, ignoring this little root end right here. That's not gonna cook up very nicely. We're gonna go right there. And the third one. Now from here, I'm really just gonna give it a rough chop. Garlic and onions are in the same family. However, they do not cook the same. Anytime you're cooking with garlic, and onions. You want to get your onions working first. In this case, we added the peppers next. Garlic is going to go after the onions start to turn clear a little bit. They burn very easily, and burned garlic is bitter garlic. We do not want that flavor imparted into our soup. Once you burn garlic, you cannot fix it. So it has a very distinct smell, so you cannot wonder whether or not it's burned, but it would make the whole soup taste very, very bitter. So we want to add that last. So the moisture from the peppers and the onions comes out a little bit, gives a little bit of a buffer for that garlic to cook evenly without burning. I'm going to turn this on to a medium heat just to keep our veggies nice and cooking nicely. Now to this, we're going to be adding a couple of Yukon Gold potatoes, peeled and diced. I'm going to be peeling them. I think the peeling of Yukon Gold is optional though. They have a very nice buttery skin. These are rather on the small side, so I'm going to be using 3. I believe the recipe calls for 2. Yukon Golds do tend to be a little bit larger, about the size of an orange. So these are a little on the small side. We want to make sure that when we peel the potato that if we are peeling it, that we are prepping it in advance, that we keep the peeled potatoes in water. That's going to prevent them from turning brown. If you're doing this right away, then there's no real reason to put them in water. You should be able to cut them fast enough to prevent them from turning brown. So I'm going to cut my potatoes small-ish. You don't want really large chunks because then when we boil it with the liquid, with the broth, they won't cook evenly and they'll still be crunchy. So we'll just break those up, put those in there. But Yukon Golds are a buttery potato. They are a softer potato, so they're not as hard as a russet, but that's a fair size for a soup. They could go a little smaller, and that's okay. I wouldn't do bigger than that. So I got my potatoes in there. I'm just gonna give this a little bit of a stir. Just let that cook a little bit so the garlic softens up and the onions soften up a little bit too. Next, we're going to add 2 teaspoons of coriander and 2 teaspoons of cumin. Coriander is the ground up seed of cilantro. So if you don't have any ground coriander, but you happen to have fresh cilantro, you can add the fresh cilantro at the end as a garnish and still get a similar flavor profile. We're going to let that in there. Now I'm putting the dry spices in now. The reason I'm doing that is because I like to toast my dry spices. I'm going to stir that and let them coat. Those dry spices are going to mix in with the leftover water in the peppers and onions, and it's just going to get coated, toast up rather nicely. And we're just going to let that go for just a little bit, not too long. Now that we have the potatoes in here, we want to be careful that they don't burn. Now to this, just once the spices are toasted, we're going to add a quart of vegetable stock. This is low sodium vegetable stock. You can get this at any grocery store, pretty readily available. However, if you have been preparing a lot of your own meals at home, you have a lot of scraps like this. onion skins, pepper parts, bits of onion like this, you can make your own stock very, very easily at home. Vegetable stock is incredibly easy to make. You take all your scraps that you have, herbs even work in there as well. Rosemary, there's really no rhyme or reason to it. You just put vegetable pieces in there that are fresh. You don't want them gross or slimy or old. Put them in a pot, you cover them with water, you bring it to a boil, and you let it simmer for about 15 minutes for vegetable stock. You can add any herbs you want in there, rosemary, thyme. You can add a little bit of lemon. You can even add your tomatoes or things like that. The only thing you do not want to add is potatoes. We're not putting any starch in our stock, but really any sort of vegetable scraps you have will work. If you are making a chicken stock, you can do the exact same thing with your vegetables, except you add chicken bones to it, and that's all you need. So you say you have a chicken that you prepared in a crock pot, you can take that carcass after you're done, save it, pop it in a pot, cover it with some vegetable scraps and chopped up celery and onions and carrots, whatever you didn't use the week before, and you can boil it away. Now a chicken stock has to boil for about 45 minutes to an hour to get a good stock out of it. So you really want to make sure that you're letting it go for a really long time to pull the flavor out of the bones. And you can even do the same thing with a fish stock or a seafood stock. If you have shrimp tails that are left over, if perhaps you had fresh fish and you had the bones, you can take those bones, boil it up with a little bit of vegetables, and get a really nice seafood stock that you can use. This soup can take either 3 of those and it'll work just fine. Vegetable, seafood, or the chicken stock that you make. And it's a very simple thing. You can make the stock in advance, you can keep it in your freezer, you can take all your vegetable scraps and keep those in your freezer. And then when you accumulate enough, pop them in a pot, cover them with water, let them boil for a little bit, and you've got your own vegetable stock. We have our potatoes, our onions, our garlic in here right now with our spices. We've just added our stock. To this, I'm going to be adding a can of garbanzo beans. And we're going to get this on high, and we want to bring this to a boil. Our soup's come to a boil right now. This is going to need to boil for roughly about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how small you cut the potatoes. Those are the item that's going to take the longest to cook. So you're going to be cooking them until they're roughly fork tender. If you need to test one, you can just take one out with a spoon or something and see how soft it is. In the meantime, while we're letting this simmer, we're going to prep cabbage. About 1/4 of a head of cabbage is going to go into this soup. These can be pretty big and bulky to work with. So what I'm going to do first is peel off these outside looser leaves. This is perfectly good again to use for stock. If you were going to make your own, you could save these and use them. And this is still edible, but it does make it hard to hold on to because it's not really firm with the cabbage. So all these look good. I'm gonna take my head of cabbage. I found the best way to cut cabbage, the easiest way, is to rock your knife back and forth. Work it slowly down the middle. And our 2 heads of cabbage right there. I only need 1/4 of this, so I'll cut my half in half, putting my flat surface on the cutting board. And again, I'm just gently rocking the knife down there. Now you'll notice I left this part intact. It's the same as if I'm cutting an onion. I'm gonna leave that part intact so that it holds all of those leaves together and it keeps them tight. The soup that we're making, we could just tear this up with our hands or something like that, but it helps to cook faster, and if it's shredded, similar to a coleslaw, but not quite as fine. For me, this is a rather large cabbage. So I'm gonna cut this half in half again. Trying to make sure to keep that root intact on both ends. Then what I'll do is, starting here at the top, working down towards this part, I'll just take my knife and just cut rather fine strips. Now when we get to here, we have this root. We can cook this, but I wouldn't advise it. So I'm gonna just gently turn the cabbage and just work with the natural curve of the vegetable. And that's a good stopping point. There's more there, but it's really not enough work. It's not enough effort with what you're gonna get. So I'll go ahead and take this cabbage and put it in my soup. While I prep my other This seems, volume-wise, it seems like a lot, but as we cook it down, it's going to wilt, it's going to, it won't become as rigid, so it won't take up as much space volume-wise once it gets into our soup. This will still be a rather hearty soup with between the garbanzo beans and the cabbage. A lot of that water is gonna come out of the cabbage. Now, if you'd like, if you don't have cabbage, you can definitely substitute this out for kale, some kale, fresh kale. You can also even shred some Brussels sprouts and put that in there. Very similar texture, very similar cook time for everything. And if you like a pink soup, you could use red cabbage. So we're gonna let this simmer again for about another 15 minutes. Just until we make sure the potatoes are done and all the cabbage is cooked. Now that this is simmered and cooked down for until the vegetables are soft, times can vary again, like I said, depending on how you cut the potatoes and how thick you cut the cabbage. We're ready to plate. I'll turn the heat off, and we can see that it's a really hearty, really rich vegetable stew. Hearty just doesn't apply to stews with meat or gravies. You can have a hearty vegetable soup or stew. It just is it has a nice full body experience to it. It's really yummy with the potatoes, give a nice butteriness to it. The cabbage has a nice, it's gonna have a nice crunch with the onions and the peppers as well. So for this and other heart-healthy recipes, please visit us at AugustaHealth.com.